Hi, welcome. Thank you for attending our webinar today. This is, I think, the third in the series of 5.4 webinars, and today we're going to talk about the Pixel Perfect Reporting feature, which I had to practice saying. But you might have seen me a couple weeks ago. I talked about the new security features in 5.4. My name is Andrea Vega. I'm on the engineering team at Intrinsic, working on the Informer product. And so I'm excited to be the one today to talk about our Pixel Perfect Reporting, which we're calling templates. So what we mean by that is you want to have an exact output of your data. This could be something like an invoice from an order, or maybe a form letter, dear first name, comma, congratulations, where you want to take your data and you want to bind it to a template, and then you want to download it as a PDF or something like that. So that's what we're calling templates in 5.4. So this is a beta feature. So 5.4 is a full release, but we included templates in it as a beta feature because we wanted to get this into your hands as quickly as possible, because it's already proving to be really useful for the people we used for usability testing. And we wanted to get it out in the field. So that's what we did, and you're able to access it if you have version 5.4 of Informer. So what's the difference? I talked about PDF, so what's the difference between the PDF we already offer and this? So the difference is that our current exports in Informer are opinionated and already styled for you and structured based on either the data set or report that you're looking at or visual. So we'll give you an export file that you can download or email, but it's already kind of determined. You get a few options, like for PDF, you can pick the margins and the font size and things like that. But this is different because you're having complete full control over what your output looks like. So I'm going to talk about how to, first of all, enable this so that your users can access templates if you want to turn on this feature in your version of Informer. And then I'm going to show you some examples to kind of get the wheels turning and as terms of like how this might be useful to you. And then most of the time here today, I'm going to spend just making a template from scratch. So you can see everything involved in it, some tips and tricks for your tool belt as you go, and then try to use this feature on your own. So I'm not going to spend any more time in slides. I'm going to go straight to Informer now. Let me close my spreadsheet. PowerPoint, I mean. All right, so in Informer, when you have 5.4 going here, if you're a super user, you will notice this templates state on your homepage now. It'll automatically show up to you, but you have to be a super user, which is basically like a full system admin. If you want to let any of your other users take advantage of this, what you'll need to do is you'll go into the user that you want to allow to access this feature. And then they've got some individual permissions. So in the bottom, it says what their permissions are. You can click edit, and then there'll be a checkbox here to enable them to be able to create these templates. So that's how you can turn this feature on for your other users. So once you've got it going, you just go in and it looks like all the other list pages where you can create a new one and give it a name. So I'll do that in a second, but I wanted to give you an example of one so you can get the idea of what I mean when I say a template before I start making one. So this is an example invoice template. This came from our invoice template here. So when the user goes to the template, they'll be presented with some parameters if there are any required, the same as an ad hoc query. So when you go to an ad hoc query, it asks you if you want to enter any query parameters as inputs, and then it uses those to drive what results come back from the query. A template is the same way. So if you wanted to print out an invoice, one of the more logical things you could ask for would be the order number. Or maybe you want to just see all of the orders, and so you would provide no input here, and that just means give me all of them. So if I click Run Template, what it does is it gives me progress as it's going, and now I get to see what my output looks like. So this is the HTML output for my invoice. So it's got my logo, some information about the invoice record, and then some itemized invoice items, and then a total at the bottom. And if I were to open this as a PDF in a new window or download as a PDF, it'll give me the same prompts. And then in this tab here, it shows me what the output looks like as a PDF. And you'll notice that with the HTML version, it was broken up, like they're stacked on top of each other. But when it goes out to PDF, there was a marker in the template that said page break here. So now you get separated pages, one for each one of the orders. So that's an example of one template. So that gets the wheels turning a little bit on an example. Here's another one we've got for financial aid, where you enter in a student ID and you run the template, and what it gives you is the financial aid rewards for that student. And so if you get that in PDF, here's what it looks like. So it's got like the amount that they have been granted, which would be coming from the data from the query. And then it highlights certain numbers at the bottom. So all of this data has been driven by a query that was run. So this hopefully gets you thinking about how this could be useful for you. But typically, you're binding results from a query or more than one query. You can have multiple queries. You could even have queries that the results of one feed into the input of another. So you can get pretty cool with it. But at the end of the day, you're going to have an output that's probably going to be PDF, although it also you can view in HTML. So to do that, I'm going to start from scratch making an invoice. The one that you just saw here, I'm going to make one pretty similar. So I'll go into make a new template, and I'll call this my webinar invoice template. And I'll save it. And now what it's going to do is it's going to take me to my template editor. So the template editor is an HTML editor, basically. So the reason why we picked HTML is because there's really no need to reinvent the wheel. This is exactly what HTML is designed for. There's tons of resources out there for it. A lot of people already know HTML, but if they don't, YouTube videos, Stack Overflow, just Google searching, or even like Microsoft Word or Google Docs. If you really feel uncomfortable with HTML, one way to start is to go into like a Word document or a Google Drive document. And then as you lay it out the way you like it, you can save it as HTML. So you could just copy paste it in. But I would recommend learning the building blocks of HTML because it's really not that much to know. And once you have them, it's like Legos. I mean, you can easily build what you're looking to build. And in fact, we've had some really great successes during our testing phase with people who had never done any HTML before, but after an hour or two, they were able to take what they were trying to accomplish and able to produce it. So it's up to you how you want to do it, but me personally, I would recommend just reading up on HTML a little bit, and I will walk you through how to do it in this case, and maybe that'll help a little bit too if you're unfamiliar with it. But the editor here, you can see it says there's a body, which means the body of the page, and then there's a div that says hello world. So div like is divide section. It's just a section in your HTML. So over here on the right, this is a preview of what the output looks like. So if I were to change this and hit Command S, like save, or you can hit this little save icon here, and as soon as you save, it reloads it over on the right. So you get a live, or as soon as you save it, it'll immediately show over here in the panel what your output is. So that's your preview panel. Down here below, when it says context, this is ultimately the stuff that you can use in your HTML to get your output. So before you even do anything, we offer a few things that you might want to use. So that's why there's something in there, even though I haven't added a query yet. One thing you might want to use is the user. That means who's looking at the template. So if you were to have some user fields, such as like the person's department, then when person A looks at it, they might see something different than person B. So you can use the current user to drive content in your template. So user in session, you may or may not use that. Inputs, that is what this section over here provides. So an input is just like a query input. You can ask the user when they run the template for information, and then you can use that to either bind with a query that you're going to be running, or you could just use it to control something about the template itself, like which form are you showing or which header should you show. So inputs can be used in multiple ways, and so can queries. So I'm going to just start laying out the template, and then later I'm going to show how we'll bring a query into play. So to start, I'll just say, well, I definitely want to have a title. So I'll just say header 3. This is my invoice. Okay, and so now I want to bring in my logo. So if I go to assets and I upload a file, I can go and find my logo on my computer. And it'll show me my intrinsic logo here. And I might just rename it, which you can do by clicking on the 3 dots here. So you can call this my logo. Now, if I want to use that in my document, I'll do it the same way that this style sheet is set up right here. So the style sheet is an example of how you would use variables in your template. This says URL style.css. So the hello world or default template that you start out with when you make a new one comes preloaded with the style CSS, which is empty, but it's already linked for you in the template. So it saves you a step of having to go in and make a style sheet and add it to the header. It's sort of assuming you'll probably want to have styles, and so it goes ahead and sets that up for you. Now, if I wanted to use an image, what I would do is use an image tag and give it the source the same way I did my style up there, which is to do my curly braces, 2 of them, the URL, and then the name of the file. So I would say logo.png. And then I save it. And over here on the right, you can see I've got this giant image. So this is where styles start to come into play. So whenever you want to style something, the best way to do it is to give it a class. And you can name it whatever you want, but it's best to do something logical. So I'll just call this one my logo. And now what you do is you go into your style and you say what you want to do with that logo. So here I'll say .logo, and I want it to have only the width of like 150 pixels. So when I save that and I save my template, you'll see over on the right, it shrunk my logo down to be 150 pixels wide. Another thing I might want to do is to show the order information for this invoice. So what I'll do is I'm going to wrap the entire document that I'm going to have in a div, and I'm going to call it invoice. That way, if I want to do styles, I can target everything inside this container with those styles. So I'll call this invoice. And the nice thing is when you save it, the document automatically formats the code for you, so you don't have to constantly be tabbing and making things indented. It already does that for you. So in my style, I'm going to say that my invoice will have a header. And my logo is inside my header. And now maybe I want to have some other information off to the right, like maybe the invoice number. So I'll say invoice details. Okay, so now in my style, what I'm going to say is my logo, I want it to be over on the left. And my invoice details, I want to be over on the right. And now I want my invoice to take the full width of the page. And I want the invoice header to take the full width. Okay, now my invoice details, I want to float right, and I want them to have a gray text. So I'll say the color should be gray, the font should be bold, and then I'll say my invoice number is, and so we'll just do a placeholder for now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the customer is Andrea Vega, and the order date is, what's today? So that would be 7/28/2021. So I'll put a line break between each of those. And I'll save it. So now I've got intrinsic on the left and I've got my invoice number on the right. And now say I want a specific font for everything on the page. So this body tag right here contains everything. So if I put a style under there, then everything under it will get it. So if I say body and I want my font family to be, so if I type this, it'll suggest to me some options. So I can pick from one of the ones here. So if I said, Arial here and save it, now my font is going to be Arial. And now if I want to change the font size so it's not so big for everything, I can give it a default here, like 14 pixels, and that'll shrink it down from 16. And now maybe I think the bold is too much, so I can take it off. So as you work through your template, you can see on the right, as you make changes, it'll immediately refresh the template for you. So now that I have some basic information, now I want to show my actual order details in here. So to do that, I'm going to use an HTML table. So an HTML table in this case is really good because it works well with PDF and it flows the content as the content grows and shrinks. It has a natural way of showing that information. So an HTML table for templates is usually a good way to go. So to make a table, you say table, and then there are a couple tags that you'll want to memorize, and they're really easy. One's a row and one's the cell. So the TR is for the row, table row. And then for the inner part, we use TH if it's the header and TD for if it's a cell, and that it means table data. And that's what the TD stands for. So let's see, what are we going to want in our table? We're going to want to have the product that they're buying. So I'll say TH, this is the header, and I'll say the product. All right, and then I'm going to copy this a few times. What else do we want to see? We want to see how much it is, so the unit price, how many they bought, quantity, and then the price after the unit times quantity occurs. All right, and now for the actual data, we'll get some TD, we'll say, so we'll just put some fake data in there so we can see it. So the price, the product would be, shoes, and the quantity, the unit price would be, say, $12, and I want to have 2 of them, and so that would be $24. All right, and then finally, I'm going to want to have a total row for all of my stuff. And I want the row to go across all of them. So if there's 1, 2, 3, 4 columns, then I could say col span equals 4. And then I give my total, which would be $24. All right, so now I need to make sure I've got my header kind of stacked up with my table. And so the header needs to either define a size or we need to change the layout of the header. So I'm just gonna go ahead and give the header a size. I believe I called it header. Yeah, so we'll just say like the header is 125 pixels high. Okay, And now I want my table to also stretch the width of the template. So I'll say, I'll give this one something called invoice table. And then we're going to give this width 100%. All right, so now what we need to do is style it a little bit. So I want to have my header left aligned for the text and right aligned for numbers. So for my THs, which are the headers, I want to say text align left, and same except if it's a number. So how do I know? I would just add a class to all the ones that are going to be numbers. I can call this a number cell. And so I'm just coming up with these names, but you can come up with any name you want, just something logical. That way it's going to be really easy to maintain your template. So all these are number cells. And if it's a number cell, we would say text align right. Okay, and then finally, I think I want to make the background of my header gray and maybe a border underneath it. So background color is light gray, or maybe just a border color, border bottom, 1 pixel solid light gray. There we go. All right, so here's my template. I also want to give just a little bit of space to the things inside of the table cells so they're not so slammed up against each other. It's more readable when there's a little bit more white space. So for the table data and for the header, I'm going to give it a padding, which is padding around the item inside of the cell, of like 4 pixels. All right, so I've got my table here. Now the total line, I want a special style. I want that to be bold and all the way over to the right under the price column. So I'm going to give this TD a special class called total. And over here, I'm going to say total should be text align right. It should be font weight bold. And it should have a border top. Okay. All right, so now we've got our template. Now we need to talk about getting some real data in there. Maybe making our header not quite so tall. So to get some real data in there, what we'll want to do is now we'll want to bring in our query. So you may already have a query out there in mind that you're going to be backing your template, or you may customize a query designed specifically to provide data for a template. There's no right or wrong answer here, but there is a consideration. So typically what makes it the easiest is if you have a query where when you want to go have like an invoice at a time, that kind of maps in with either like a single record in the query that might have some array values like the details, or if you know you're only going to always print out one invoice, then all the records in that query would kind of match up with the items that you're going to show. So there's no right or wrong answer because we have ability to do scripting with the results that come back. But if you get your query in the right format to begin with, you might not even need any script at all. So I'll show you what query I made for this template. And I'll show you real quick like how to make these if you're not quite sure, because it just takes like 2 seconds. But I've got order invoices, which I made, and it has all the fields that I might possibly need, as well as some criteria so I can run it with certain inputs. And then I have a flow step, which kind of merges things we want together, meaning the details all like rolled up into one row, which is the order. So here, my query inputs, I can say like the company name and then run it. And now it's going to give me all of the order invoices for the company that I entered here. So it looks like there's four orders, and they're all going to Portland, USA, which is where this company, the Big Cheese, is that I picked. So that was a funny name. So here I've got all the orders. Here's the order numbers, the order dates, where it was shipped to. Here's that data I wanted to show in my table. So I've got the discounts, the amount, the quantity, the unit price, the product name, and some other stuff that I may or may not end up using, like who took the order and what the company or the contact person at the company's name was. So if you wanted to make a query and you're not too familiar with this, I'll just tell you how it works real quick. I won't go into it too deep because this is probably its own demo, but I'll say like webinar example query. So you pick your data source, which could be a database or a web data source. And then you pick the mapping, which would be kind of like a table that you want to query off of. In this case, we want to do orders. Then you pick your fields that you want to have in the template or the query. So I could say I want to have the ship address, or if you're like, I want to get all of them to make it quick, you can get the order detail information here, as well as like the employee's name, who took the order. So this is how you build your query. You just pick the fields from our field chooser that you want to have in them. Then you can add criteria to limit them by clicking on this button, and you can add a new criteria like only for the company name. And then that's it. And if you wanted to do the merging like I did before, so that all of the order numbers kind of roll up into a single row, then we have a flow step. And so all the records in the query go through flow steps. And we have one called merge duplicates, which I think is going to be really handy for templates. And it lets you choose all the fields that you want to represent one row. And then everything else will be shown as arrays. So if I were to say, the order, all the order information and the employee and the customer, all of that stuff is on the same row. And anything like the details of the order, for example, the unit price, discount, all that stuff, those should be shown as arrays. So if I do that, then what it does is it rolls all of them up into the format that we saw on my original query. So I know I went through that quickly, but that hopefully will give you an idea of a quick way to write a query that goes really well with your template. So I'm going to hop back over and I'm going to use the query I showed you a minute ago, which I've already created. So where do you pick the query? So now I've got two sections I haven't touched yet. One's inputs and one is processors. So inputs you would use if you want to ask your user for something. So if you wanted to have the same query parameters show up when you run the template as you do when you run the query, here is where you would add the same inputs that you have there to the template. But you could just leave them blank as long as they're not required, or you can hard code in a literal value for any of those inputs. And the processor section is where you would add your query. The reason why it's not called queries is because there's a lot of cool stuff you can do here. Queries is just the most logical for this demo, but you can use a data set if you've already got a data set with the data you need. We also give you like a full-blown data set search, so you can do a very precise search expression to get the data you want from your data set. We have a native SQL option. If you just know your SQL and you just want to copy paste it in here, you don't really need it as a proper query and informer outside of this place. You can just put your query in here. And we also have a power script. So for those of you who aren't familiar with our flow steps, we already have a power script editor for our query designer. And what this is, it's JavaScript, but it gives you full access to each record, as well as like a greater context for the whole query. So it lets you do things like two-pass calculations or manipulate a record, whatever you want. It's just a free range script to be able to handle whatever you need to handle for your query. So we have the same thing here. The power script in our templates gives you the opportunity to take the results of your query and produce calculations or do something specific with them before you get to the template. That way you can get exactly what you need to display, and you don't have to rely on the built-in features from our query runner. But for this example, I think all we're going to need is the query. So I'm going to pick ad hoc query, and it'll ask me which query to use, and this is going to give me all the ones I have access to. So I'm going to use the order invoices query. And it gives it a label for it to show up on the left-hand side, as well as an output variable. And the output variable is how it shows up on the bottom right in the context, and also how we're going to refer to it when we get to our template. So I'll go ahead and save this, and it shows me now all of the inputs that I saw when I tried to run the query before, and gives me the opportunity to fill some in right now. So I could bind it to another template input, which I don't have any, but I could make a new one for the template and say use that. So when somebody goes to run the template, then ask them. Or I can say, well, I really have a specific one in mind for this template, so I'm going to put a literal value, and then I could, do the big cheese again. So when I do that and save it, what it's going to do is run the query, and then it's going to give me the results. But I haven't used anything variable-wise up here, so it's going to show me the same thing it did before. The only thing that's really changed is now in my contacts down here, I've got order invoices, which is what I used as the output variable when I added the query. So it says order invoices query, which is just information about the query that you might want to use, like the fields in it, for example. And here are the records. So this is where the data is. And so it looks like I got more than one record, and we got 4 earlier, if you remember I ran the query. And it's got the same format we saw in the output. Let me just run over so you can kind of see what it looked like here compared to there. So if I run it here, this is the same query that I'm running as a ad hoc query versus looking at the results in the template. So you'll see I've got all this order information, and then when it starts to get to the details, then it's broken out into arrays because those are the line items that are going to show up in the invoice. And so when I go back over here, this is what the data looks like when you're looking at it from the template. So here are the columns, the order information, and here are the values that are arrays, meaning that there's more than one item in that slot. So let's talk about how we get this data into the template. All right, so if I go back over here, now let's start replacing those placeholder values with the real data coming out of the query. So to do that, I'm going to use the same double brace syntax as I did for the URL up here. And what this actually is, it's a templating language called Nunjucks. You might be familiar with one called Handlebars. They're all very similar. But the cool thing about these is they have a lot of built-in features that you can take advantage of. And so I'm going to show you the most likely ones that you will use today. So the most likely one is variable, because that's kind of the point of the template, is to replace values with variables. So for the invoice number, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the records. So anything in this context object over here, I can refer to by name in my template. So order invoices, I can simply say order invoices, and I will have access to anything in that object. And anything inside of it, I can get to by using a dot. So if I wanted to get to the records, I could say invoices dot records. And if I want to get the first one, the way that items in an array work is that they start with 0 and then they count up. So the first one is going to be a 0. So I could say 0, and this is going to give me my first record. Now I can use a dot again to go further into the record to get an item. So if I wanted to get the invoice number to show them, well, that's my order ID. So I'll say order invoices dot records 0, which is the first one, dot order ID. And then I'll save it. And there you go. So it says invoice number 10310. So I go and look at the records. There it is. All right, so now I'm going to say the customer. So let's go and get the customer's name. So I can do the same thing. Order invoices, records, customer contact name, and maybe we can give the company name too. So maybe they're Liz Nixon at the company name. And then we'll do the order date, which is the order date. There it is. So 0.order date. All right, now I hit save. Okay, Liz Nixon, the big cheese, and then there's my order date. So when a date looks like that, it's called an ISO date. And that's probably not what you want it to look like, but it's got the most information you could possibly want, including like time zone and stuff. So if you want to look like something else, then we need to use what we call like a filter. So a filter is where you can put the pipe character, which is this, after a value, and then call a function to make it display the way you want to. Date and number are probably the two most likely things you'll want to make a filter for. So I'm going to call this one, I'm going to call it anything. I'm going to call this one my date to make it clear that I'm not using a special variable name. So I'll call it my date, and then I'm going to go over to helpers. So just like styles, helpers is a file that's included with your brand new template. It's not something you delete or rename. It's a special file that is bound with the template. Just like your data, it gets bound with the template. So any function that you write here, which a function takes a value in and gives you a value out, can be used by putting that pipe character in the template. So here I can say function my date, which is what I called it over there. So I can take in a value. This also can be named anything you want. You'll just refer to it as the input of what you're sending into the function. And now you have access to all of the libraries that you have in our PowerScript. So if you know anything about flow steps, you'll know that we have Moment, Numbro, Lodash, and a few other libraries. We'll have some documentation for this, but just know that all the things you can do in a PowerScript, we made available here as well. So I'm going to return the moment value dot format, and then give you an option to do any kind of formatting you want. So I'll say like month, month, day, day, year, 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 year. And if I save both the helper and the template, you'll see my order date format changed. So I might want instead to show the full date instead of the number. So I can use the 4 M's, and it shows September 20th, 1996. It's a while ago. So moment formatting is its own web page, but there are a lot of different options that you can do to customize exactly how you want the date to look. But that's probably what you're going to do, something like that. You can also access things like time and AM, PM, things like that. All right, so that's how you do date formatting. Now let's talk about the actual data in the table. So there's more than one item in this table, so we can't do that record 0 thing. So that kind of leads me into talking about loops. So if you're not familiar with looping, looping is what allows you to take an array of items and then do something for each item in the array. We also are going to have this problem with the invoices themselves, because as you know, we looked at the results of this query and we had 4 orders or 4 invoices. So we're going to have not only multiple items, but we're going to have multiple invoices. So this is where your for loop comes in handy. So there's Nunjux, which is a Mozilla product. There's a lot of documentation on this. So I'm going to be doing this for, which is where you say for item in items, records in this case, I want to be able to access things about that item. And then at the end, you say and for. So what you want to do is wrap what you're going to be repeating over. So in this case, it's going to be the invoice. So I'll say for invoice, made up that name, in, did not make up this part, I have to use this variable name. So for invoice in, order invoices dot records, I want to have an invoice page. And so at the end of the div, that's where I'd put my in for, because that's where I want to stop the repeating. Okay, and now anywhere where I used to say record 0, the first one only, now I can just say invoice, because it's going to do it for all of them, not just the first one now. All right, so there we go. We've got all the different invoices and they're all repeating. So we'll do the same thing down here for our data. So for all these rows, we'll want to repeat over all of the items that are in the invoice. So we'll say for item in invoice dot, and now we need to pick one of those fields that's in the array to repeat over, because we don't know how many there could be. There could be 1, there could be 10, there could be any number. So for one of these orders, invoices, we'll just pick the first one here for convenience. So for item in invoice.order details discount, it's just the first one I found. It could be any of these. I want to have a row. And 4. And then I want to show information about that row. So here I want to say invoice dot, so here I want the product name, which is here. So I want the product name. And then here's another little trick for you from Nunjucks. If you want to refer to an index, which is, you know how I did record 0? Well, if you want to know which one you're in, which we kind of need in this case, we can use loop.index0. And that just means, you know, starting at 0 instead of 1, which is always what you want to do with arrays. So I'm going to just copy paste this real quick because we're running out of time, but I definitely want to get through this example. So we've got the product name. Now we want the unit price here, and we want the quantity here. And then we want to show the price, which is actually the unit price times the quantity. So another cool thing you can do is you can use multiplication inside this expression. So you can do unit price times quantity and get your price there. All right, so we've got the unit price and 10 of them, and so it multiplies the unit price times the quantity, and there you go. So now I wanted to have a total at the bottom, so you could either do this in the script, or you can go and do all of this logic in your template. So it kind of depends on what you feel more comfortable with. So if I were to say like set total equals 0, then inside my loop here, I could also update total here. Total equals total plus, or set total equals total plus this guy. And now, instead of showing 24 at the bottom, I can show the total. Right, so total. Okay, so it added up all of those values and then shows the total at the bottom. So the last thing I want to show is currency formatting, which I think will close the book on this template. If I have a number here, but I want to show it as a $sign, I'm going to add a new helper, which is probably your next most common one, and I'll call it currency. And the other library I mentioned is Numbro, which does our number formatting. So you can say like Numbro value dot format currency. And then you can give it like how you want to, if you want to do like 2 decimal places, how do you want to do like negatives? So I just happen to know this. They have a website for Numbro as well. So now if I go into my numbers that I want to show as currency, I called that thing currency. So I can say the unit price is currency, and this thing, I'm putting parentheses because I want the whole thing to show as currency. So now if I save it, I should get the numbers showing as $signs. There we go. All right, and then the last trick I want to show before we end is I want to show you how to break things up into pages when you go to do PDF. The way you want to do that is pick the top thing that you're repeating over. In this case, my invoices. I already have a class called Invoice for this. So if I go to there, there's a CSS property you can use for this, which is page break after. And then you can say always, and what that does is nothing for HTML because HTML has no concept of a page. But if you switch it over to PDF, then what you can do is see how every invoice gets its own page instead of like glomming them stacked on top of each other like you see for the HTML. So you can see here my output breaks on each invoice page. So I get 4 pages. So I think that's all we have time for. I know that was a lot. If you have any questions or if this seems like it might be too much in terms of like how much you have time for diving into HTML, you can start with Google Drive or Word to get HTML that way. It just gives you like more code than you need, and that's a little harder to maintain, but if it gets you there sooner, then that's great. We also have services. Our customer service group can help create these for you. So if you really want to do more of a consulting thing, if you have exactly the output you want, but you just need help to get there because of hours in the day, we can definitely help you with that. So I hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions, reach out. We don't have time for a Q&A live, but if you put questions in the chat or email us, we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So thank you again, and I'll see you next time. Bye.